Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a vibrant and insightful 19-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to find his path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Janell Strube, a domestic interracial adoptee. One way she tries to make sense of her adoptee experiences is to write. Janell is a memoirist, novelist, and poet, and she will be sharing some of her poetry with us later on. She was a foster mom to several children and adopted one of them when he was 15. I recently met Janell in person when she came to the Reckoning with the Primal Wound screening in Orange County. It's always nice to meet people face to face, and I'm so glad that the Los Angeles and Orange County area adoption world can come together in person sometimes, hopefully more often. So in this episode, Janell will help us explore issues around race and adoption that will give you pause and make you think more deeply about that intersection. So welcome to Unraveling Adoption, Janell. Great to see you again.
Good to see you, Beth, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yes, your story is very interesting, and you have two perspectives of the adoption constellation within yourself. So that's pretty important for us to be listening to both of your perspectives, plus all the different intersections you have with race and things like that. So why don't we start with just your early childhood? How old were you when you were adopted? Kind of the basics of all that.
Okay. I was adopted when I was 4 days old. It was a church adoption. And so they were informed a couple of weeks before I was born that there was a biracial child on the way. So one day they didn't show up at church. And the people said, "Why is your wife not there?" And my dad said, "Well, that's because she's home with the baby." And so that was me.
It just happened so fast?
It happened very quickly. So my birth mother had not made a decision until that very last bit to relinquish me. I'm going to use that word. She didn't want to, but she was persuaded to or decided to. So they had a couple of weeks to know and to make that decision and to go get me.
Wow, that's not a very long preparation time.
No, but I have a sister who's 13 years older than me, and my parents had been trying to have children for that time. And so they were looking to adopt, but I don't think they could afford to. But because of this opportunity in their church, they were able to do it.
So kind of a private with two lawyers, and
it was a private adoption. Yeah. And long into the future, it turned out that my birth great-grandparents actually lived next door to my mom and dad.
Oh, is that how they knew the situation and everything?
That's how they knew my family, because then my birth mother had known of my mom and dad.
Okay.
That was one of the couples that she chose as a possibility in our church.
Oh, okay. And what part of the biracial makeup would you like to tell us about?
Okay, so my birth mother was white and my birth father was Black.
Okay. And we will definitely talk about that more in a little bit, but I wondered, how old were you when you found out you were adopted, and when did you find out you are biracial?
So this was the 1960s. So the word that was used was not biracial in those days. That's a more modern word. So I'm actually going to use the word that was applied to me for all of my childhood, because I think it's actually important.
Okay.
So I am light-skinned. However, I think that for my parents, they were always concerned that someone would say something or tell me before they did. So we had lived in Montana and they moved away to California. So just shortly after we moved to California, my mom and dad took me into their bedroom and they said, "We have something to tell you." And one of them said, "We don't want anyone to tell you before we tell you." And then they told me that I was adopted. And they told me that I was mulatto.
Mulatto. Oh.
Yeah. So from that point on, every time I was introduced at church, I was always introduced as the mulatto child the Strubes adopted. That happened to me for a very long time.
Oh.
And I didn't get called biracial until much later. And then it became not that Black when there was another girl that my parents took in who had curly hair when I didn't. So I'm writing a memoir, and that's where the title comes from, Not That Black.
Not that. So you were introduced or referred to as Not That Black?
I was introduced as the mulatto child. that.
Okay, but later on,
they stopped doing that altogether because probably I protested it so much. I didn't like it, right?
Yeah.
And after this other girl came into our lives, they had to look back and say, well, truthfully, she's not as Black as they thought. But of course, in my mind, I was always raised as half Black and half white. So in my life, that is who I am because that's how I was raised and that's my perception of me. And it's fine from that perspective. So that's when I learned. I was 3.
3 years old.
I knew what adopted meant because there was a girl in Montana from the Native American orphanage who came to my mom and dad's house when I was little. And she asked my parents, my mother, if she would adopt her. And my mother said no. I was in the living room. This is why I tell you, I remember things from when I was really young.
Oh my gosh.
My mother said no, because we don't have room and I already have 2 babies. Because of course, right after they adopted me, they got pregnant with my brother. And so he's 13 months younger than me. So,
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I knew what adoption was.
How old were you when that happened? When you heard that conversation?
I think I was 3 because it was just shortly before we moved to California, and we moved to California when I was 3. So I understood that.
That's pretty remarkable. Yeah. I don't remember anything from 3. So that's pretty remarkable that you have such, well, there was big news, I guess. But.
Yeah. I ran away. I did a few things. I did some famous things in my house. Like,
so when you were 3?
Falling out of a car. Yeah. Swallowing a penny, doing other things after I think they might have been a little bit causality of I was adopted and then I did these things. Not really sure, but those are the things I did after I learned.
Do you remember the emotions you had when you found out?
Yes. So there's 2 records of it. There's my record in my head, right? I was in the bedroom and I'm little. So I was crying on my mom and dad's chenille bedspread, which I don't like chenille.
I remember those chenille.
Yeah. They had a white one. It was always scratchy. In my head, I cried and cried and cried. And then finally I had to swallow my tears because it was time for dinner. I had to get up and go to dinner. So they left me in there. It was nap time. But I remember it as a very long time. And I don't remember my tears ever really stopping inside of me. They just went into hiding. From my dad's perspective, he wrote a little journal entry on his IBM typewriter that he had where he said, we told her and she cried for a little bit and then she was fine.
Okay, fine. We're just fine now.
Yeah,
good.
We're fine.
We're good to go.
It's all good. Exactly. Not true. But that's what they thought. And they really thought it didn't matter the color of the child. It didn't matter anything, just as long as my mom had a baby. She didn't want a teenager. So she didn't want that Native American. She didn't want a teenager because she thought if I have a baby, then it's all what I do to this baby that makes this child. So that's what she thought.
The nurture side.
Yeah, which was very sad for my mom to learn that was not quite true. It was rough, probably.
Yeah.
Still is.
I adopted my son quite a bit later in 2004, but I didn't really think like blank slate, but I thought, well, we're his parents now and he'll just grow up here and it'll be fine. I was so naive and I thought I put a lot more weight into nurture than I really didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But nature's really, really important.
Nature's strong.
Really strong.
I have met my half siblings and we drink Dr. Pepper. So,
all of you. Oh,
yeah. We eat maple bacon. So,
okay.
it goes a long way inside. So,
yeah, it does. Crazy. I've heard so many of those synchronicities and it's so, so important. Well, how was your family and your community growing up with your race? Were they all white? Like everyone around you was white? Or?
Everyone was white. And I belonged to a Christian sect who met in homes. So it was very hard because there are a lot of racist people there. And there was a lot of racism that happened at the dinner table. A lot.
Oh,
and
really?
It was hard on me because I didn't like it. But if I said anything, you're supposed to turn the cheek. You're supposed to be kind and gracious. You don't protest and you forgive 70 times 7 in a day. So there was never any protesting or protecting of me when those things would happen. They just happened. And then I think there's a little bit of pride in my parents, this mulatto child that they adopted. So they were really doing something that might have really seemed amazing or different or exotic to them, something of pride. But I think for my mother, she didn't always really see me quite as a person of equal value. So that's always been a something.
Did you always get the sense that you were rescued or saved from some ill-fated life you might have had?
Not an ill fate, because they didn't give me any context of why I was adopted. Just your parents couldn't raise you. So I gave myself context. When they didn't do that, then I told my own story.
Which was?
I kind of like my story.
Yeah?
I did. It was a good story. I used Uncle Tom's Cabin, the book, and the painting, which I think it's called The Dog Trade or something like that. My sister was reading that in her senior year of high school. So I looked on that and I saw this Black family, and they were very poor. They were in rags, and even their dog was starving. My adopted dad was the 11th child. So he was the last. The doctor said, you're not going to have any more. So his middle name is Omega, like Alpha and Omega, right? Because the dog. Yeah. So that was the story in our family. So my thought was, well, maybe my parents were old and poor and they had too many kids, and I was the last one, but it was just too much. So I internalized a lot of guilt because I felt like I cost too much. There wasn't room for me. They couldn't keep me. They couldn't have me because I was a burden. So that's the story I told myself.
Yeah. You don't have to tell me details, but do you have a lot of money issues in general? Like,
today? My mother, my adopted mother, would cry every month when we did the bills because we did not make a lot of money. So I can't do my budget. Okay. And I'm an executive. I am a vice president in a company. I've been for a long time. I can manage millions of dollars of tax, whatever. But for my own personal self, I just have it on autopilot. So I don't have to look at it. I don't have to worry about it. But I always feel like I have to protect myself and I have to have provision for myself.
Yeah, I bet. When you have experiences like that as a kid, and the story you're telling yourself is that you came from nothing. The sense of there's not enough, the scarcity, I bet had a lifelong implication. Yeah. Whether or not you have money, it sounds like you have a very good job.
And so I made it. I did it. But there's always that worry still. Like, when can I stop and just write 100% of the time? Yeah. Because I'm no, I can't. Right. But yes, but that was the story I told myself until maybe I was about 9 or 10. And I discovered that, in fact, my mother had been a teenager. She was 19. So obviously my birth father wasn't old either. He was a teenager. They were in college. Yeah. So, but I didn't learn that. I didn't learn about him until I was like 12, but that's the story I told me to have context. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all you got. If you're not getting a bunch of information from elsewhere, you just make it up. So, and it got you through, right? It allowed you to keep going.
Yeah. It did.
Now, can you give us an example of the racist shit you had to hear growing up?
Yeah, I can. It is terrible. So I'm going to preface this by saying it's terrible. I have a piece of memoir out there on it, but Black people are fat, dumb, lazy, stupid, always poor, don't do things well, don't do a good job. I mean, you can just keep on going this way. But I'm also going to say a couple of worse things, like, they have feelings too.
Oh,
that's horrible. So this is, to me, when I write about the racism behind closed doors, this is what I mean. Wow. And, it extended into when I was 12 and I met my birth mother and I met my birth family on that side. I had a grandmother who said, don't call me grandmother. So that was very hard on me, like lifelong.
So your grandmother on your adoptive side or your birth side?
My white birth mother's mother.
Oh, your birth mother.
Yes.
Oh, because she didn't want to have anything to do with you because you were half Black.
Yes. And my mother reported to me that her family said, you're not bringing a Black child into this family.
Oh, okay.
So,
wow.
Yes. So this is what racism really looks like behind closed doors. To children who are adopted into families where they're not paying attention to what is being said.
That's absolutely horrible. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. And they like literally said those words.
Those are the words. These are the quotes. So, it's like, I write about it as being like radiation landing on my skin.
Yeah. Did they forget that you're half Black?
So what I write about sometimes is some people forget, or some people don't know, or some people don't care, and they're doing it deliberately. So, which is painful in itself. That's really painful when people do it deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
And, I write about racist comments like these are cuts on the soul, and they're cuts on the soul to a child.
Oh, probably more.
Yeah.
Because you don't have any reference point when you're a kid in an adoptive home, for sure.
Yeah.
You have nothing to compare this to.
Right.
And everywhere you looked, there's white people, and
yeah,
you didn't have role models. Oh, man.
And we went on a trip to Watts. We went to the Watts Tower, but my mom wanted to see where the riots had happened.
Okay.
And so that was another learning experience when I was 5 about poverty and fear of Black people, just being afraid of being in the neighborhood of the people. But of course, that was also kind of like sightseeing in a place of unfortunate people. Not that I think people looked at it that way in those days. But again, as a small child, you're taking in any context you have. And so I also had the Encyclopedia Britannica, which, I looked up the word mulatto, and then you could find all the other words of division that would go right after that. So I was trying to learn everything on my own that I could. And I don't think I probably was 5 before I saw the first Black people I saw in my life.
I was going to ask, when did you have any cultural mirrors or racial mirrors in your life?
No. When my sister was older, she was a teacher, and a principal of hers became a family friend, and he was Black. And so he told my parents, you're not doing, I don't know what he said, but he was basically said, this isn't right. You should let her have experiences of her culture. Mm-hmm. So we did go to a Jesse Jackson event at the university.
Okay.
So that was very interesting. I think I was 12 or 13, and it might have been a fundraiser. I don't know. It was very expensive. The people are very wealthy who went there. And my sister and my mother and I were the only white people. Of course, I wasn't really white, but
yeah, I know.
But I was very light skinned compared to everyone who was there. And when my mother came away from that, she called her best friend and said, I was never so embarrassed in my life. And so that was it. That was the one experience we had. So I think for me, I had to find my own good connections. So when I went to high school, there were more Black people there. And I got a friend who is my best friend. She's still a super good friend to me. Aww, and she's Black. So that was me seeking out for myself what I couldn't get at home. Yeah.
Wow. Why was your mom embarrassed?
I think she felt uncomfortable because we were poor, we weren't dressed appropriately. But also, it's very interesting. Sometimes when white people are the only white person in a Black crowd, suddenly they feel what it's like to be the other way around. Yeah. And it's not so comfortable. It's hard sometimes for them.
Yeah.
And so I think it was hard in that circumstance for my mom. And she didn't really know how to handle it.
Yeah. It sounds like she didn't take that awareness and go, I wonder if that's how Janell feels all the time.
Yeah, no, she's not that self-aware. She's not, she did the best with what she had, but she's just not that person. She has her own things that are difficult for her, and that seeing that, and I'm going to say she's always looking at the underdog and considering them. So she's able to do that. And she never said anything bad about my birth mother, which I think is very important. And I give her all the credit for that. So, these are things that she wasn't able to do, but the things that she was, which not saying anything bad about my birth mother meant that I didn't have this judgmental view toward her when I met her, even if I still gave her a hard time.
Okay. So when did you meet your birth mom?
I met her when I was 12.
Oh, okay. Well, that's young.
And I went to spend summers with her when I was 13 on. Well, I think my parents really, I was just desperate. So I wrote poetry to the universe. I wrote essays in school. I wrote about running away to find my real parents.
Oh, so you were really vocal about it.
I wrote it on the back of a trivet even, that I wanted to find my real parents. And that trivet went around the dinner table one day. And one of our guests, who I have kind of referred to some of the comments of him, he picked that up and he looked at it. And his wife helped my mom to find my birth mom.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
that's pretty creative to write it on a trivet.
Yeah. I think there's a story there because when I was little, I was writing my memoir. I didn't know it was a memoir. I was writing my story when I was 4. I had a pen, I had paper, and my dad got very angry with me for wasting paper. He didn't understand that I was telling the story of my life in scribble. But, to me, it wasn't scribble. To me, it was what happened to me as being adopted and being abandoned. And so it hurt a lot that he was so angry. And so what happened is I began to write on things that couldn't be thrown away and weren't paper and were hidden. So I would write things in the back of my closet or on this trivet or in essays at school so they couldn't be seen at home. And even later, not in English. So that's how I did it. So
what other language do you know?
Well, I learned French in high school. So I wrote an essay about not wanting to be black and white, not wanting to be gray, not wanting to be a shadow of two worlds who will never meet again. So but I couldn't say that in English because it was too dangerous and it was too hurtful to my family. And it was too dangerous and hurtful to them to express all these feelings of wanting to find my real family in my mind.
Thank goodness you had that tool at your disposal. If it had all just been stuck in there without any release, that would have been terrible.
Yeah. And I think I'm that feisty person that, that's what kept me sane in there, that writing self.
Oh, yeah. Did anyone at school go, wow, you sound really troubled. Can we help you at all? Or
no, because, in those days, especially, it was still, people didn't have counseling at school. They didn't do things like that. And the actual belief at the time was that adopted children are more well-adjusted and they're fine and they go on to succeed and do well. And birth mothers are fine and they do better in their careers and for themselves after. So that was the thought process that was in the baby scoop era, right?
Yeah.
Where that's what people were told.
Just let them get on with their life.
So there wouldn't be any expectation that there would be issues. None at all.
Oh, wow. But you certainly knew there were. You didn't have anyone telling you this might be a problem. You knew from very, very young, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You were really aware. You said you were an old soul, huh?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
You've been around a few times, I think.
I think I have actually, somehow. Yeah.
I think that about Joey. Sometimes he's so wise, more than any 19-year-old I know, and just so in touch with his pain and his reality. But then on the other hand, he, has trouble just doing daily living. but the insight is there. I'm like, where did that come from?
Right.
Maybe just out of the pain or maybe
or the experience, or I don't know. I was a very reflective child as a small child. I would lie behind the couch and watch the clouds and watch the motes in the air and think about them. So I always feel like a strong connection to the universe somehow. And so I just feel like there's a flow that goes through us. And I see this in my son. He's like trying to figure himself out, because he's adopted and he doesn't have any context of family. And he's looking at his last name, which is his last name, and looking at coats of arms and looking at the history and medieval history of knights, trying to figure out who he is. So I think there's this part where you can begin to try to connect with the universe so that you find context when there's something broken in your background and your history.
Just that searching, that longing for some sort of connection. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, when you walk out into the world, you look like a white person, especially this last couple of years when things have gotten so, with the murder of George Floyd and just so, it's just in the air more than ever, I think, lately.
Yeah.
How do you identify, what do you call yourself now? And how do you live in this space as a biracial person?
That's always been hard for me, right? It's like, even as a child, you'd have to bubble in, were you black or you white or whatever? And what am I supposed to bubble, right?
Half a bubble here.
Exactly. And you couldn't do both. And that was bad. In California, you could not do both. Finally, in Florida, you could later. But I'm all tangled up. I am black and white inside my body. So it's not like I can separate it. But I am very aware of what's going on. During the Black Lives Matter events, I had already started writing the names of the people who were being murdered. And it was really bothering me what I could do. And I realized that every bit of racism that's directed to me is mostly mental. It is not physical. It is not my body being broken and put at risk. And yet I can clearly see, if I go with some of my friends and we go look in a model house and the husband's black, they're following us around, even though they never followed me around. So I certainly am very attuned to things that sometimes many white people don't even notice that's happening because I'm very attuned to it. So I think what is hard for me is what's going on now, especially with erasing history of race and all the stuff that's going on. I'm so terrified that we'll go back to the Plessy Ferguson days where, the Supreme Court said it's totally fine to have Black train carriages and white cars. Well, where will I fit?
Yeah.
Where would my blonde daughter, who is more like Plessy than I am, where would she fit in that rule?
You need to straddle both carriages, right?
Yeah. And in those days, it was like the person who was Plessy, it's the one drop rule. So he was very white. So he was white. He had blonde hair, he had blue eyes, but he was known to be Black, right? For that. And so the Supreme Court said, yes, you have to go to the Black car. So what will happen in this society if we keep tearing ourselves apart? It's so frightening to me, and it's a lot of stress to me. Yeah. And I worry for my daughter's sake. It wasn't until 1967, after I was born, that some states were required to let interracial couples marry.
Yikes.
So it's very scary because you can just see the pendulum swings of going back and clawing back all the things that we're doing. So I really feel very passionate about that. And it's very frightening to me because where does it leave me? Where does it leave my children? Where does it leave everyone else? And it's not just about me. It's about all people that live in this mixed world. We are not a black and white world. We're a mixed world and we're a web and we're connected.
Absolutely. I don't blame you for being scared. I'm scared too, but I don't have to live like that in between. Yeah. Not that black, but not all white, like somewhere in the middle. You don't fit in either side. That must just be really disorienting.
So I've had to come to a conclusion that because I can't be either, and I don't really have cultural context because I didn't grow up with a Black family to be a part of. So I don't have any of that history or race, the culture that comes from that. I don't have it. My daughter has more because her stepmother is Jamaican. So she has far more than I do. She'll sometimes like, well, why don't you teach me this? And why didn't you do this? And why didn't we have that? And I'm like, I don't know any of those things. I learned about Juneteenth when everybody else did, which is so sad, but I didn't know. So I really have to feel and live as a bridge because I do. And I do that all the time. I have people of many cultures and I lived in Dubai and I entertain people from all over the place. And I really just feel like being a bridge is the best thing I can be because I'm standing in two worlds. And I have to have strong pillars in myself to survive that. And I think that's always the part you have to find the root in yourself that's stronger than any of these hard things to withstand them and make something out of them so that you find a purpose in that so that it doesn't sort of sweep you away.
For sure. Well, that sounds like you've done a lot of work, a lot of inner work, and you've come to a really amazing purpose to be a bridge. And I can see you doing that. That's really amazing. At some point, you decided to start fostering children. What was the impetus for that?
So growing up, I was adopted. My mom had a friend, a couple, they were friends, and they had two foster children. And the one foster son was the same age as me, and he'd been in their house probably almost as long as I had been, but they had never adopted him.
Okay.
And one day when he was 15, something didn't work out in the house and they sent him away. And I was so horrified because even if there was a lot of conditional love in my household, my parents were going to send me away. They would not do that.
Oh, man.
So that really affected me.
Yeah.
And it made me feel like there are kids out there who maybe, and I wasn't looking at children, small children then. It just opened my eyes to shelters and children's group homes and other ways in which children are living in very bad conditions. And so for a while, even I was on a board of a group home in Florida, but that was a very short while because I couldn't stand how the children were I just couldn't handle it.
Oh, wow.
But I did become a foster parent in the years when we were trying to have children and we couldn't. And so there were like shelter where you just shelter them for a couple of days. And then a couple that were a little bit longer. And then the son who ultimately I adopted later, years later, he was in the house for like a year and a half. And then he had to go home to his mother.
Oh, okay. But then later you adopted him.
Yeah. But then later when his mother passed away tragically and he went back into foster care. And it wasn't working for him very well. I just was like, the only thing that is going to help this son of my heart, because he was always the son of my heart for the first day I saw him in a shelter, is for me to just commit to him. Mm-hmm. And a commitment to a 16-year-old who's been through a lot is a day-by-day commitment. Mm-hmm. That's what it has to be. But that's all I could do at that point, was just understand that it's a daily commitment.
Yeah. And was he wanting to be adopted?
Yeah. At that point, his mother was gone. He didn't have a father. He said to me, because I said, I put in to adopt you. What do you think? Do you want that? And he said, I was hoping you would.
Aww.
So that doesn't mean things were perfect.
Sure.
They're never perfect. And my son struggles a lot, but he is doing as well as he can. I'm really proud of him and how he tries to bring joy in his life, even though you cannot go through a life of so many foster homes and so many changes and not have consequences. It's impossible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As difficult as adoption is, I think that the foster kids that get tossed around here and there, that's just like, whoo, that's extra layers.
Yeah.
And often they're old enough that they understand what's going on. And
absolutely. Yeah. And it's just, and some of that is they're just not really even encouraged, or there's provision to help them with the right resources for counseling or whatever. They're just not there. So it's tough.
It's woefully lacking.
Yeah.
So, but you're still in touch with your son?
Oh, yeah.
How old is he now?
He is 35, and I went to visit him. I was in Florida last week for work. So when I got to Florida, and I wanted to take my son and do something outdoorsy, because that's what we kind of do. And so we went to this tropical garden, and he wanted a hat. And then he decided he wanted me to have a matching hat. So we have these matching gardener's avocado hats. They're hilarious. But it was like, how many moms get to go around with their 35-year-old sons and wear matching clothing, right? It was funny and fun, and it meant a lot to me. And I feel like that it meant a lot to him too. So it was good. It was good. And that's a precious memory to have.
That's lovely. He sounds like a really interesting and unique person that's got a big heart.
Yeah, he does. He has a big heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what advice do you have for parents, adopted or not, that have biracial children?
Yeah. So I do have some advice. This I decided to write down because I felt it was so important for me to make sure that I said it. And so what I would say, because there are actually a lot of biracial children living in my life that are not all adopted either. But I would say to parents, examine your prejudices and the message that you give to your children about the other race, the race of the other parent, because a lot of times that can be teaching them to hate themselves and to deny that part of themselves for fear of being thought to be that way. So everything I said about Black people that I was told, I had to try to be everything that was not. And that's not the experience of Black people. And it wasn't fair that I didn't get to know all the wonderful people and the wonderful things that I have to learn later. And it's kind of awful, but for adoptive parents, when you're looking at those prejudices, do you really believe that your child is an equal human being? And that's a really hard thing to ask. It's a hard thing to say, but I think that's something that people should really look at, how they view the world and other people. Because if you think your culture is better than everybody else's and you treat people as not human or lesser, that's going to come across to your child.
I hear that with biological siblings. When there's a biological sibling of the same race and then the adopted person is a different race, that they get treated completely differently. That's an indication that you don't see them as
the same.
Oh,
that's completely true.
That's good advice.
I would also say, don't tolerate racism in your home. Don't excuse it. Don't let it happen. Protect your child. And model non-racist behavior. Value all cultures and invite people into your homes and have genuine friendships with people of other cultures and other religions. Being that bridge. I lived in Dubai. I have amazing friendships. I spent a lot of time in Morocco in my career, a lot of time in Florida, meeting a lot of people that are of religions that are non-Christian. And it's just such an enrichment to my life, but it's also modeling that behavior. And I would really recommend that. And then don't dismiss the fears and experiences of your child. So if your child is coming to you and saying, I don't like this, this hurts. Part of the, oh, you're not that Black was my mother telling me, well, you're not as Black as the people they're talking about. So you're not the same as those people that they're talking about.
They're not talking about you. Oh,
yeah.
That hurts both directions.
It hurts. Exactly. So just, to listen and be an advocate, even if it's hard and it's not easy because nobody has all the answers, right? I don't have answers, but try to find ways to help your child protect themselves against those things because they won't always happen in your hearing, but they will definitely happen outside your hearing. And then children may not always tell you of the racism that's happening and being directed to them. And maybe don't assume that it's not happening if you're not being told. Sort of assume what you see happening to other children or people in this world and think it might happen. I know that one of the things between my birth mother and me, who is white, we never talked about the racism that got leveled on me. It was something that I didn't want to hurt her with because I think we really wanted to have a relationship and there were many things that were hard. Yeah. So I didn't want to burden her with that. But maybe in the end, I look back and maybe it was a mistake. So maybe I should have, but I didn't want to hurt her anymore. And then kind of more the obvious for adoptive parents, don't think that you're the savior of your child. They didn't ask for this situation. I did not ask to be born to someone in the baby scoop generation where it was too embarrassing or inconvenient for me to be kept in a family. I didn't ask for any of that. So it's a nice fairy tale that everything works out perfectly. But the reality is there's a lot of pain and suffering and grief that goes on forever. And when a child can't speak about it because it's not validated, it's really hard. Set positive role models and examples from the child's background. Today it's called mirroring, right? But it wasn't called that then. But it's just like find people that you can relate to. And I think one of the things I did for my daughter was very important to me. Her pediatrician was Black. As many Black professionals as I could bring into her life, I wanted to have that for her because those were things that I didn't have for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then to make sure that wherever your child comes from, whatever culture, not to belittle it, dehumanize it or the culture, and to really be respectful of the traditions of other cultures and the thoughts of other people. And I think one of the things that I thought was so beautiful, I decided to take a trip to New Orleans to find my roots. And there are no roots of me in New Orleans, right? Like I didn't come from there, but I felt like that was a place where many slaves came to America up on ships through the Mississippi River. So I decided I was going on my own journey of trying to find my roots or myself or my history. And I went on Black tours. I went to museums. I tried to learn a lot. But the thing that I learned the most, I was sitting in a restaurant and this Black man came in with this little girl. He's holding his little girl by the hand and he was dressed so beautifully in like blue and raspberry shorts. And she was all in pink. And they're looking in the restaurant. And I hear him say to her, no matter what, will always be colorful. Aww. That was so beautiful. I have a whole poem I'm writing on that, but it was so beautiful. And I wish I'd had a father to say that to me in such a way to make me understand that being colorful is being beautiful.
Yes. Oh, that's very touching. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you didn't have that.
But being colorful is being beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Everything in my life is lived in bright color. So that's me now. Yes. But it's been me. And I think there's always the part of me that makes me survive this is because there is a hefty bit of stubbornnness and determination inside me that has never been stamped out.
Yay. So, yeah. You've always been a little bit spunky, right?
Yeah. And I don't believe everything that's told to me. And I think that's kept me a lot. So not believing and examining and looking at it from afar. And that's, the writer who's always that introspective person who steps away from the action. Because I am such a person who steps away from it, then I'm not reacting as much as I am observing and figuring out.
Okay. And that gives you a little time to figure out how you fit into it. Yeah. So you're that observer role. Yeah. Well, I think we need to hear some of your writing. Okay. Do you have a poem or two that you'd like to share?
Let's see. I could read a tree poem or I can read This is the Alone. Oh. Maybe I'm going to read that. So it is in the beginning of my memoir and it's been published this year. Okay. So this is the alone. This icy moonscape of the strange you step into when you are adopted at birth, cut off from the voices you knew, the smell of her perfume, the taste of food she loved, the rumble of her laugh, the rhythm of her unique heartbeat. This is the implicit trauma they write about, lost before language, but just there, resting right in the middle of your gut, that feeling that something has gone horribly wrong and you don't know where you've landed.
Wow, that's intense. And I can hear my son saying those words. I can identify with his expression of those kinds of ideas, not in so beautiful language, but that is touching and sad.
I think the other thing is that I use poetry to take things that are hard and painful and ugly, and I turn them into art and something of beauty. And so sometimes it doesn't work for me. Like if I write about someone in my family telling my parents, you should give that baby back, she'll be nothing but trouble. Ooh. And then someone says, oh, that was so beautiful. And I'm like, what did I say that you didn't actually hear what I just said? Right. Oh. Because the language is, I don't know, but I really think that it's sort of like painting it over and over and over until it becomes something of beauty that was something hard in the beginning is something. Yeah. And I'm trying to think, I have that piece of bridge, but there's a line from the last chapter in my memoir, and it says, there is no way to clean a gravestone but on your knees. And so in that, I'm cleaning my grandmother, my birth grandmother's gravestone. And that's the end of my memoir, when I feel her own griefs and sorrows in my body as I'm cleaning her gravestone. And I connect to all the people that were on both sides of my family. And I feel them in my body. And I realize I'm just a part of them, whether for good or bad. And I can go on with my life. And I really know that writing this memoir is helping to put it there. And it really calls to me. So I can kind of just like, okay, I want to write the next thing after this, but it'll get there.
And when is the memoir supposed to come out?
Well, it needs to get all the way finished. So first draft is done, and I do have an editor and we're working on it. And then I need to either decide to self-publish or find someone for it. Yeah. So draft 1 is done, but it's now going through and plugging the holes that are missing and the parts that are missing. It's not all bad, right? Our lives are complex. Sure. And so seeing let's say my adoptive mother in the light of who she is as a person and her struggles and putting in how that maybe didn't work with my personality and how I made it worse for her, just trying to understand those things. And she's a human. And too, like there I said, she, it's like there she is. We're equally human and complex and full of pain. And I need to respect that and respecting the pain of my birth mother and her sorrows. That's also something. She never threw anything away in her life after that. And she didn't throw me away. She gave me away. But when she died and we had to clean everything out, that's what I understood of her.
Was she like literally a hoarder?
She was a hoarder. She had a really big house and she could hide it all. But she was a hoarder. And I realized that was tough for her. And I want to, in my memoir, I want to look at all of those things are complex. I'm a complex person. I always like tough things that don't have easy solutions, right? So it's not just, it's this, but it's like all the people that were players in this and how they were all hurt by this, or how we all came together to make something good of something that was hard.
Yeah. Like the cosmos just like dumps you guys all together. Yeah. So for some, I don't know if you believe in a purpose or a reason, but are you familiar with epigenetics? That trauma literally passes down through your genes?
Yeah, I believe that is true. I think more Eastern medicine looks at that a lot more than we do here. But since we already existed in our grandmother as eggs already, so the trauma of that white grandmother who said, don't call me grandmother, her trauma is in my body.
Yeah. You were born with a whole pile of stuff that isn't even yours. Right. It feels like yours because it's been there since the beginning, but yeah. And so just trying to mitigate that level of pain for the next generation and the next generation.
Exactly. How do we stop it? How do we do our best? And we're all imperfect and we're all struggling to try. But I think that's the one thing in the generation of, let's say, my sister and me and her 2 adopted children and my child and my adopted child, we work really hard to be a family of love in all its variations. And love isn't everything, but unconditional love is so important. And acceptance of people's differences is really important.
Yeah, that's kind of the crux of it. If we can just do that, that would help a lot.
Yeah. And not feeling that our children are mirrors of ourselves, right? And letting them find their own place in life, even though we want them to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they were born in our bodies or they came into our lives other ways, but it's easy for us to have the tendency to think we know best, but it's their journey.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're just the cheerleaders of that. And that's sometimes so hard.
Yeah. My mentor talks about having every person as a seed, and you don't know when they're born or when you get them what it's going to turn into, what kind of plant it's going to be.
Yeah.
But it's got to be what it is. Like that seed in every person has to express itself.
Yeah, exactly. That's because the seed has everything in it for life. Just the soil and the water is what it needs, and the sunlight. But it's all there.
And we can provide that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've actually written, I don't know what's wrong, but I was trying to find it. I wrote this new poem that is now the front, and because I have all these tree poems in my memoir.
Yeah.
But the first poem is now a seed. Here we go. Okay, this is the seed. So it's in the shape of a seed. And it says seed to be a little bit obvious because it's harder to see this as a shape than the tree.
Okay.
This is the story they kept from me, the one they hid, the one they didn't want me to write, the one coiled up inside of me all along.
I love that. Would it be possible to put those, what do you call it, graphic poems, where the I could put a link to those? Are they on your website?
I'll put the two out there, the one that I read today, and I'll put the other one out there too. I might need a little help from my website designer. I'll get them out there so that they're out there.
Well, I would love to have people see those. And what is your website? How can people get a hold of you?
It's literally so easy. It's janellstrube.com. So it's not hard. Now, my name is spelled a little bit differently. It does not have an E on the end. It's JANELL. STRUB as in boy E.com.
Okay. Very good. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that I haven't yet?
I don't think so. I think just that importance of being a bridge and just understanding. Maybe there is one thing. Of course, I always have something else to say, right? It's been so hard for me to actually tell my story. So I wanted to thank you for listening to my story. Very often when I tell my story or try to say it, people say, oh, you didn't have it that bad. Or, you're not that Black, so it's not that. Or everyone has trauma. And so it's always not validated. And very often when adopted people try to tell their story, they literally are shut up. And so I just thank you so much for letting me tell my story today. It's the first time I've told it like this. So thank you.
Wow. Oh, I'm honored that this is your first time. And I think it's so important for adoptive parents particularly to just shut up and listen to adoptees. Just listen. Just listen to their story. Don't try to make it better. Don't try to smooth it over or minimize at all. Just let them share their story. Yeah. So I really appreciate you sharing. And I know it takes an emotional toll to dredge all this up and to share it out into the public. So thank you for that emotional energy you took to do that. And I know that your story is going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. So
yes,
thank you.
I have to keep doing this, for my son's sake. And, I adopted interracially as well. And I made a bunch of mistakes. So I'm trying to, I give myself grace for not knowing what I didn't know then, but now I know. So I'm trying to.
And parents always make mistakes, right?
You can't.
That's like parent insert mistake maker right next to it, right? We all do it. It doesn't matter, but
we all wish we could do something different.
Yeah. But I think what's really important is when you can say to your child, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. That's a big thing. And, about listening, kids can handle hard facts. I mean, they're already living hard facts. They live as many hard things in life as grownups, and they have to process it too. So,
and giving them words to do that with is very important.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I learned a lot from your story, and I hope that everyone listening, I hope maybe you can think of people that you can share this episode with.
I will put it on my website. I'll put it on my Facebook, on my Instagram when it comes out. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll all share it around and just get your word out, and it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for listening, and I appreciate all of your support for Unraveling Adoption. You can find out all about all the things we're doing at unravelingadoption.com. And if you're an adoptive parent or foster parent, I do have a support group called Aptitude, and it is free to join. It has a lot of really great resources and support. And I also am now a coach. So if any one of you adoptive parents are looking for a little bit of extra support for whatever's going on in your house right now or in your family, feel free to get in touch with me at unravelingadoption.com. I'd be happy to work with you. So thank you again, Janell. It's been really wonderful getting to know you, and you're not that far away from me. So I hope to see you again real soon.
Absolutely, Beth. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. Janell and I want you all to stay safe.